Okay, we are going to look at this brain one more time in the dissections that I made. So just to reiterate, we have here what are called the olfactory bulbs. These, of course, is cranial nerve number 1. Here's cranial nerve number 2, the optic nerve, leading down into the optic chiasm. Inferior to that is the mammillary bodies, which are here. We then have cranial nerve number 3, which is the ocular motor nerve. We have our trigeminal nerves over here. And the infundibulum is kind of cut through here, but if we look at this other brain again, that has not been dissected, you can see that infundibulum very clear there, that hole where it used to be. Again, the mammillary bodies underneath it, right here. Again, the ocular motor nerves, optic nerve, olfactory bulb. Okay. Now, what I did do is a sagittal dissection of this brain. So I took the scalpel blade and I went straight down that longitudinal fissure. I divided the cerebellum in half, the spinal cord in half, and I created our sagittal section. Okay, so what I want to do is point out a couple key things on this sagittal section here. As we look at it, we have here what is known as that corpus callosum. That is that communication between left and right brain, so we see it on both sides. I'm just going to work with the one right now. So this is our corpus callosum here as it goes through. Okay, this is our lateral ventricle. So you can see this space on the inside here. It is filled with the cerebral spinal fluid that is produced by this blood vessels here known as the choroid plexus. So that's what we have there, is that choroid plexus. Here on the inferior side is the fornix. Okay, so we have our corpus callosum, we have the fornix, and then we have the space with that choroid plexus on it, inside of it. Now, what I want to do is show you the other half real quick and kind of point out those same features. This is our corpus callosum on the top here. This is the fornix down here. But what you can see is this space, this lateral ventricle in here. This side still has this membrane on it known as the septum pellucidum. So this is that thin membrane that separates the two ventricles, the two lateral ventricles from each other. It is a very thin membrane, and on this side you can still see that membrane as part of this dissection here. And of course there would be choroid plexus on the inside as well, because it is a ventricle. If I continue, this region here is our diencephalon. Okay, so this whole circular structure here is the thalamus. Above the thalamus, kind of coming this way, is the epithalamus that terminates here with the pineal gland. If you recall when we were looking at the other video, our superior colliculi and inferior colliculi, and as I pulled those down, we were able to see that pineal gland inside there, and this is just parts of that pineal gland right there. Now the pineal gland, of course, is involved in secreting melatonin, and the melatonin helps regulate our sleep-wake cycle. So that is off of the epithalamus. Again, this is our thalamus. Inferior is our hypothalamus. The hypothalamus, if you recall, had the infundibulum and the mammillary bodies. So again, if we look at this here, the infundibulum, mammillary bodies here. So this region is the hypothalamus. If you notice, superior to that is that optic chiasm. If we come back here again, this is the hypothalamus. We have the infundibulum, mammillary body. And up here, superior, is that optic chiasm, right? The optic nerve as it comes down. Okay, so that represents our diencephalon, is this area here. Now again, this is surrounded by the third ventricle, and so there is choroid plexus inside this third ventricle as well. Okay. Now, the third ventricle runs through the cerebral aqueduct, which is what we see right here. This region from about here to here is referred to as the midbrain. The midbrain is part of the brain stem. This is that cerebral aqueduct that connects the third ventricle to the fourth ventricle, which is this space here. And again, there's a little bit of choroid plexus inside there. Now, the key parts of the midbrain would be the superior and inferior colliculi. So the superior is this bigger region here, the inferior is down here. And on the inferior view, remember we had that ocular motor nerve, okay, right here. So that ocular motor nerve is part of the midbrain, if you see where it is innervated right there, okay? So this whole region here is the midbrain. It leads down into this swelling, this area right here. This is what we refer to as the pons. Pons is in communication with the cerebellum, okay? That fourth ventricle is in this area here. And then the pons is continuous with the medulla oblongata, which would be down in this region here, which is then continuous with our spinal cord. Now, just real quick to point out here in our cerebellum, you can see all of this white matter surrounded by the gray matter. This white matter here is what's referred to or called the arbor vitae. And if you look, it's kind of all this branching like a tree. So this is the arbor vitae, okay? So that is our sagittal dissection. And if you notice, it's, you can look at the two halves of the brain. Again, starting from the rostral end, this is that olfactory bulb out here. We've got the corpus callosum on top. We have the fornix here. This is our lateral ventricle. And over here, you can actually see that septum pellucidum. The optic chiasm is kind of what we have right there. You can see that as we're looking at that there, which makes this region here the hypothalamus. This round structure is our thalami. And then this is one part and the other part of our pineal gland. We have our superior and inferior colliculi, superior and inferior colliculi, which is part of our midbrain. The cerebral aqueduct that leads down into that fourth ventricle, and you can see that fourth ventricle here and here. So then we have our pons, which is this region here, the medulla oblongata, and then the cerebellum on both halves with that arbor vitae. And that's it.